It started with a secret. In 1953, a leader chosen by the people, overthrown in silence. A nation's future rewritten by foreign hands. Years later, the streets erupted. A revolution rose. Power changed. Enemies were born. From embassy hostages to shadow wars to nuclear threats, the tension never faded, it only grew. For decades, it burned beneath the surface. Until now. Missiles in the sky, cities on edge. The shadow war is over. This is how the world was pushed to the brink of war. Now, let's dive deep into how it all began. (1953) Coup. In 1953, Iran had a democratically elected prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh, who became very popular for one major reason. He decided to nationalize Iran's oil industry. Before this, British companies controlled most of Iran's oil and took a large share of the profits, while Iran itself received relatively little. Mossadegh wanted Iran to have full control over its own resources. This decision angered the United Kingdom, which depended heavily on Iranian oil. Britain tried to pressure Iran economically, but when that didn't work, it turned to the United States for help. At the time, the Cold War was happening, and the U.S. was worried that instability in Iran could allow the Soviet Union to gain influence in the region. So in 1953, the U.S. through the CIA and the U.K. through MI6 secretly planned and carried out a coup to remove Mossadegh from power. They used propaganda, protests, and political pressure to create chaos inside Iran. Eventually, Mossadegh was arrested, and the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was brought back with stronger control. After the coup, the Shah ruled Iran with strong support from the United States, but his government became increasingly authoritarian. Many Iranians felt that their democracy had been taken away by foreign powers. This created deep resentment, especially toward the US and the UK. This event is important because it planted the seeds of long-term distrust. Decades later, this anger played a major role in the 1979 Islamic Revolution and continues to influence Iran's relationship with the West even today. 1979 Islamic Revolution. In 1979, Iran went through a major political and social upheaval that completely changed the country's system of government. Before this, Iran was ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who was strongly supported by the United States but was widely criticized inside Iran for corruption, inequality, and harsh repression of political opposition. Over time, protests grew across the country, led by religious leaders, students, and ordinary citizens. The most influential figure was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who opposed the Shah and called for an Islami Nizam based on religious leadership and independence from foreign influence. As protests intensified, the Shah eventually fled the country. Khomeini returned from exile and quickly established a new government known as the Islamic Republic of Iran. This new system combined religious authority with political power. After the revolution, Iran cut ties with the United States and Israel, viewing them as symbols of foreign interference. This moment marked the beginning of long-term hostility and reshaped politics in the Middle East for decades. Hostage crisis. In 1979, After the Islamic Revolution, a group of Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took 52 American diplomats hostage. They accused the United States of interfering in Iran's affairs and supporting the former Shah. The hostages were held for 444 days, creating a massive international crisis. The United States attempted negotiations and even a failed rescue mission. This event permanently damaged relations between Iran and the U.S., turning tensions into open and long-lasting hostility. Iran and Israel rivalry. Iran and Israel became long-term enemies after 1979, when Iran's new leadership refused to recognize Israel and openly opposed its existence. Iran began supporting groups like Hezbollah and others that challenge Israel in the region. Instead of direct war, both sides engaged in a proxy conflict, with Iran expanding influence through allies, while Israel carried out strikes to stop threats. This rivalry became one of the most important and dangerous tensions in the Middle East. Proxy wars. Instead of fighting each other directly, Iran and Israel engaged in what's called a proxy war, using other groups and locations to compete for power. Iran supported armed groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and militias in Syria and Iraq, giving them weapons, training, and funding. On the other side, Israel carried out airstrikes and covert operations targeting Iranian positions, weapons shipments, and allied forces, especially in Syria. This indirect conflict allowed both sides to weaken each other without full-scale war. But over time, these repeated clashes increased tensions and made a larger conflict more likely. Nuclear tensions. One of the biggest sources of conflict is Iran's nuclear program. Iran says it is developing nuclear energy for peaceful purposes like electricity and research. But the United States and Israel fear that Iran could eventually build nuclear weapons. To prevent this, several international agreements were attempted, including deals where Iran agreed to limit its nuclear activities in exchange for reduced sanctions. However, trust between both sides remained very low, and disagreements over inspections and restrictions caused these deals to weaken or collapse. As tensions grew, Israel carried out covert operations to slow Iran's program, while the U.S. increased economic pressure. This issue became a central reason why the conflict kept escalating. Sanctions and pressure. The United States imposed strict economic sanctions on Iran to limit its ability to fund its nuclear program and military activities. These sanctions targeted key sectors like oil exports, banking, and international trade, which are vital to Iran's economy. As a result, Iran faced rising inflation, currency collapse, and economic hardship for its population. However, instead of backing down, Iran responded by increasing its influence in the Middle East through allied groups and military presence. This cycle of pressure and retaliation deepened tensions, making conflict more likely over time. Assassinations and strikes. As tensions increased, both Israel and Iran began using targeted attacks instead of full-scale war. Israel reportedly carried out covert operations, including assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists and strikes on military facilities, aiming to slow down Iran's nuclear progress and weaken its capabilities. In response, Iran focused on strengthening its missile systems and building alliances with armed groups across the Middle East. These groups could act on Iran's behalf, increasing its reach without direct confrontation. This back-and-forth strategy created a cycle of retaliation, making the conflict more intense and bringing both sides closer to open war. 2025-2026 Escalation. By 2025 and early 2026, tensions between Iran, Israel, and the United States reached a breaking point after years of failed diplomacy and constant low-level conflict. Negotiations over Iran's nuclear program had collapsed, and both sides had lost trust completely. Israel began launching more frequent and aggressive airstrikes on Iranian military bases, weapons facilities, and suspected nuclear sites, especially in regions where Iran had influence. These attacks were no longer isolated. They became part of a broader strategy to stop Iran's growing power. At the same time, the United States increased its involvement by supporting Israel with intelligence, military coordination, and eventually direct large-scale operations. This marked a major shift from indirect pressure to active participation. As both sides escalated their actions, retaliation became faster and more intense, pushing the situation from a shadow conflict into the open war. Start of the war. On February 28, 2026, the long-standing tensions finally turned into open war when the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes on Iran. These attacks targeted key nuclear facilities, military bases, and strategic infrastructure, aiming to weaken Iran's ability to develop weapons and respond effectively. The strikes were large-scale and highly planned, marking a shift from covert operations to direct military confrontation. This was no longer a shadow conflict. It became a visible and intense involving multiple fronts. Iran quickly retaliated by launching missile and drone attacks toward Israel and U.S. military bases across the Middle East. These counterattacks showed that Iran was prepared to respond forcefully and expand the conflict. This moment is considered the official start of the war, as both sides moved into direct, sustained military engagement instead of indirect conflict. The war quickly spread beyond Iran and Israel, involving countries and groups across the Middle East. Missile strikes, drone attacks, and economic disruption affected the entire region.